This is Meghan Markle's sickest stunt yet. This weekend, she decided to invoke the memory of dead Princess Diana in a deliberate attempt to terrorize her long-suffering husband, Prince Harry.
Again, I have to be careful what I say.
It costs nothing, but it truly means so much. Prince Harry has snapped, and this time there is no royal wall strong enough to hide it. Witnesses say that the second he realized Meghan had filmed a video just steps away from the tunnel where Princess Diana died, something inside him broke. Not cracked, broke. There was no calm statement, no polished silence, no PR spin, only raw anger. For Harry, that tunnel is not history, it is trauma. It is the worst night of his life playing over and over again in his mind.
This is gross and grim and deranged on every level.
That is where the real question hits. Who does something like that? Who films casually, smiles, and posts content right beside a place tied to so much pain? Yet there she was, relaxed in the back of a luxury car, feet up, phone out, passing the exact spot where everything changed forever. The clip went online as if it were nothing more than another ordinary day. The filter was on, the smile was fixed, and the whole mood looked casual, but people were not accepting it that way. Critics attacked it immediately, calling it tone-deaf, calculated, and openly disrespectful. For Harry, it crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. He had stayed quiet through years of pressure, headlines, and backlash, but insiders say this time was different. This time he did not hold back.
She thinks that's a win, Brittany? No, we see you, Meghan. We see you, and now the world sees you.
One source claims he called the move cruel, attention-seeking, and a total betrayal of everything Diana stood for. Those were heavy words, and they did not land lightly. The confrontation happened off camera, but it was intense enough to shake even people in their inner circle. After their appearance tied to Balenciaga, tensions exploded. Harry reportedly accused Meghan of turning tragedy into a prop, of using his mother's death as content in order to stay relevant. That accusation cut deeply, and it did not stop there. Behind closed doors in a five-star Paris suite, the argument grew louder, sharper, and impossible to ignore. What began as a private clash became something far larger, something their team could not contain.
This is her in the car videoing herself with her legs up as she went past the tunnel in which Diana Spencer was so tragically killed in Paris.
Now everyone is asking the same thing. Did Meghan finally cross the line between ambition and disrespect? Was this intentional, or was it just an awful coincidence? That question becomes even messier because Paris was meant to be Meghan Markle's comeback moment, a carefully planned return after months of staying quiet. She was front row at Fashion Week, with cameras everywhere and every move measured. For her, it was the perfect stage, full of luxury, influence, and control over the narrative. For Harry, it was simply another appearance, nothing serious and nothing risky, or at least that is what he believed. The world saw Meghan glowing, smiling, waving, and stepping back into the spotlight as if nothing had happened. Paparazzi framed her as polished, powerful, and reborn.
But I have to just say, anyone who has doubted me over the past decade about this evil woman now needs to eat some humble pie, because this video designed to mentally torture her husband.
Every look was strategic and every step was planned. This was brand Meghan in full effect until the video appeared. It lasted only seconds, but that was enough to turn everything upside down. It looked casual, with her feet up and her phone in hand as she drove past the tunnel tied to Diana's final moments. Within hours, chaos followed. Social media exploded. The comments became battlefields. People called it disrespectful, staged, and completely out of line. For those who still remember Diana's final hours, it did not feel careless. It felt like crossing a sacred boundary, but what made people stop even more was the silence that followed. There was no apology, no explanation, and not even a quick denial. There was only that same calm, unbothered presence at the next event, as if nothing had happened.
Especially when he's on the BBC saying that it's not safe enough for my family in the UK, but it's safe enough for Meghan to be alone in Paris, literally engaging with the paparazzi you say killed your mother.
Insiders say that silence was not accidental, it was strategic. Behind the designer shades and flawless poses, Meghan was not ignoring the backlash. She was riding it. The louder people became, the more attention rushed back toward her. Cameras turned, headlines multiplied, and suddenly she was everywhere again. That is where the situation begins to change, because what first looked like a careless mistake starts to look less careless. At first, it seemed like nothing more than another influencer-style clip, quick, polished, easy to scroll past, harmless, staged, and forgettable. At least that is what people thought in the beginning. Then the internet started digging, and everything changed quickly. Online investigators examined every frame as though it were evidence. The route of the car did not look random or casual. It appeared to follow the exact path Princess Diana took that night, the same turns, the same direction, straight toward the tunnel. That was the moment people stopped calling it coincidence and started calling it calculated.
Meghan is using everything for publicity.
Just another appallingly tone-deaf action.
If I know that this is a place that my husband hates because it's where he lost his mom, I'm not going to go there.
Every time stamp seemed to line up. Every camera angle felt intentional. What had looked like a simple clip now looked like choreography. The conversation turned into outrage. Fashion insiders called it symbolic. Royal commentators went further, describing it as disturbing, inappropriate, and even sick. What really shattered the illusion, though, was Harry's reaction. For years, he had stood beside Meghan through every headline, every scandal, and every wave of criticism. This time he did not. Witnesses say he walked out, not quietly and not calmly. After that, he reportedly refused even to travel with her. That silence carried its own force. But behind the scenes, matters grew even more intense. Sources claimed that the argument which followed was not really about the tunnel itself. It was about intention.
And she did this all after teaming up with the dodgy child scandal fashion brand Balenciaga during a bizarre trip to Paris.
Harry allegedly accused her of using his mother's death like currency, something to cash in for attention. Her response was said to be cold, direct, and completely unfiltered. She reportedly fired back that it was just a location, not his property. That single line changed everything because it did not only hit Harry, it struck the entire situation like a shock wave. Hours later, Meghan appeared front row at a Balenciaga show, a brand still facing backlash over child-related controversy. For someone whose image leans so heavily on advocacy and protection, the optics looked terrible. Critics did not soften their response. To them, this was not support, it was contradiction. When asked, her explanation was simple. She was supporting a friend. Online, that answer convinced almost no one. People called it selective morality, choosing when to care and when to look away. An insider put it bluntly, every time her spotlight starts to fade, something controversial seems to pull it right back. That is where the situation darkened because it no longer felt like one bad decision. It felt like a pattern. People started connecting not only this moment, but everything that had come before it. From Netflix deals to red carpet appearances, each wave of outrage seemed to arrive just before something new appeared, an announcement, a feature, or a headline. Insiders began calling it a cycle. Shock, silence, spotlight, repeat. Right at the center of it stood Meghan. People close to the Sussex circle say Harry is beginning to see it too, not just the headlines but the pattern behind them. Every storm breaks, yet somehow one person benefits more than the other. His trauma becomes a talking point. His mother's memory turns into imagery. His silence creates room for control. The strategy is seen as simple but effective. Turn criticism into attention, turn backlash into visibility, and keep the name circulating no matter what. Even the Balenciaga appearance seems to fit that pattern. The brand still draws controversy, but controversy brings eyes, and eyes bring relevance. For Meghan, that formula keeps working. For Harry, it is draining him. Friends say he is trapped, caught in a loop he cannot escape. Every time he defends her, he gives up another piece of himself, and every time he pushes back, the story only becomes larger. That is the trap. It is no longer only about one video or one fashion show. It has become about control, emotional, public, and psychological. It is a strategy built on pushing limits, wrapped in the language of empowerment and sold as something inspiring. That may be the hardest part to watch, because what once looked like a bold love story, royalty meeting rebellion, now feels colder, sharper, and far more calculated. It looks like a brand built on controversy, powered by pain and protected by cameras. Coincidence or calculation, that is the question following them everywhere now, and it is one Prince Harry can no longer ignore. Section 2, the debate did not slow down, it only grew louder. Paris was glowing in gold that night, but around them the atmosphere had turned ice cold. Meghan moved through that world as if it were a Hollywood set, as though she could rewrite the script, place herself at the center of every scene, and cut out anything that did not fit the narrative she wanted. The impression was simple. She was doing her own thing, moving however she wanted, while Harry could simply go along with it or not. For the first time, she was no longer being photographed like a star. She was being watched like a case study. Every blink, every small shift, every glance in Harry's direction suddenly seemed loaded with meaning. Cameras zoomed in on the smallest cracks. Her smile slipping for half a second as Harry walked past, without saying a word, became something people fixated on. His jaw tightening when she reached toward him and he did not respond became another moment replayed again and again. There was no shouting and no dramatic scene. There was only distance, and sometimes silence lands harder than any argument ever could. Online, that tension exploded. Clips were slowed down, replayed, and examined frame by frame like forensic evidence. Experts began breaking down micro-expressions as if the footage were from a crime scene. A half smile became proof, a blink became guilt. Every edit made her appear colder, more distant, and more calculated. Then came the crowd footage. Harry stepping out alone, flashes firing around him one after another with no pause, no wave, and no smile. He moved straight through the noise like a man carrying something heavy that no one else could see. It looked like the world would not let him breathe. Then the contrast followed. Days later, Meghan appeared at a gala dinner, glowing, composed, and outwardly untouched. On the surface, she seemed completely steady, but the closer people looked, the more they focused on her eyes. They never seemed to stop moving. They looked as though they were scanning, measuring, and tracking the room. It no longer read as someone seeking approval. It looked like someone watching for control. That is where the real twist in the story started to settle in. Samantha, Meghan's sister, posted a question asking whether it was true that her sister had been taking selfies in the tunnel where Diana died, because that was what she was hearing. She said that if true, it would be a sick example of being a disaster tourist. Stephanie Sidley took it even further, saying that if driving toward Princess Diana's death scene was meant as a message to Prince William, then Meghan Markle was the devil. Those reactions pushed the mood even darker. The more polished everything looked on the surface, the more fractured it seemed underneath. Behind every flash there was a shadow, and lately that shadow looked a lot like Harry. There was no sign of connection, no warmth, and no indication that anything was being repaired. It looked more like two people circling the same scandal while still pretending it was a love story. One insider did not soften the picture at all. According to that account, it was not a marriage anymore, it was a performance. That line stayed with people. Days turned into headlines and headlines turned into distance. The clip eventually stopped trending, but the damage did not disappear with it. Harry pulled back completely. He became less public, less visible, and chose silence instead of confrontation. Meghan moved in the opposite direction. She leaned in harder. Instead of offering any explanation, she increased her visibility. There were charity events, curated appearances, carefully managed interviews, stylists around her, cameras ready, and messaging under control. The criticism only sharpened. People asked how someone could claim to care about protecting children while promoting a brand accused of inappropriate behavior toward them. Others asked how she could show so little thought for her husband's feelings while moving through the same city where his mother lost her life and treating it like a joyride. The signal people took from all of this felt clear. She was not backing down. She was rewriting the narrative because for her control was not about truth, it was about perception. Behind the scenes, advisors were reportedly scrambling to manage the optics, contain the fallout, and soften the edges of the story. This time, though, even loyal insiders could not fully hide the cracks. Harry stopped appearing beside her. There were no more synchronized entrances, no more shared moments, and no real united front. Some said his silence was strategic, others said it was survival. At the same time, her camp was said to be pushing a completely different version of events through anonymous leaks and quiet whispers to the press, shaping her as misunderstood, misquoted, and misjudged. It looked like a classic celebrity move, turning pressure into sympathy and sympathy into renewed attention. For weeks, tabloids reflected that image back to the public. Each version of her looked more polished than the one before. Harry, meanwhile, was increasingly seen alone. Quiet dinners, unfiltered moments, heavier shoulders, drained energy. He no longer looked angry so much as tired. That was where insiders said the real shift had begun, because he was starting to understand something brutal. The more he tried to repair, the more he fed a machine he did not control. Every apology became another headline. Every attempt to steady the situation became another story shaped around her. Once that pattern became visible, it was impossible to unsee. That is why the question stopped being only about controversy. It became about who was actually controlling the story and who was paying the price for it. Then came the whispers of a new project, something quietly moving in the background, a full rebrand being carefully pitched to studios. The themes were already in place. Resilience, motherhood, misunderstood women. Just like that, the cycle seemed to begin again. New sympathy, new spotlight, and once more silence from Prince Harry. It did not look like recovery. It looked like repetition by design. The scandal had not vanished. It had evolved. In that world, silence did not mean surrender. It meant staging. Sometimes the quiet after the storm was not peace at all. It was preparation. The calm did not look calm anymore. It looked like someone planning the next move. Every royal story is supposed to be about legacy, but this one refused to stay there. There was another awkward moment people kept replaying, one that felt almost as cringeworthy. She appeared to think something was funny when it clearly was not, turning toward Marcus Anderson as though expecting him to join in. Instead, the impression was that he wanted her simply to turn around, behave, and not ruin what had already been set up for her. The tension in moments like that added to the feeling that things were not merely messy. They were controlled, strained, and close to breaking. For Harry, legacy was never really about crowns or status. It was always heavier than that. The memory of Princess Diana was not just a chapter in history, it was personal pain that never truly faded. Her face was still everywhere, in headlines, interviews, documentaries, and endless retellings of her life. Her story kept being replayed as if it had never ended. Now that same legacy had become a battleground. Grief sat on one side and spectacle on the other. Friends said that whenever Harry talked about Diana, he did not speak in the language of image or symbolism. He spoke about her like a wound that had never healed, not as the people's princess, but as a woman who wanted peace and never found it. That is why these moments cut so deeply. Every time Meghan referenced Diana, through jewelry, through comparisons, or through carefully placed gestures, it did not feel like tribute to everyone watching. For Harry, it felt like something being reopened that had never closed in the first place. It was his pain being dragged back into the light, turned into content, shared, dissected, and amplified again. People close to the royal circle said that what started as admiration had slowly turned into something else, something closer to imitation. It no longer looked like honoring the past. It looked like reshaping it. It no longer looked like remembering. It looked like controlling how it would be remembered. That shift is what people said was tearing Harry apart. No matter how much he tried to move forward, the world kept dragging him backward. Every headline pulled his name back into history. Every controversy forced him into a story he had never chosen. He was still being seen as Diana's son, not as a man trying to step outside that shadow. Meghan, meanwhile, seemed untouched on the surface, still talking about empowerment, still presenting strength, still building her narrative piece by piece. Critics, though, saw something very different. They saw reinvention again and again, every moment polished, every message calculated. That was the image settling around them, and it was becoming harder for anyone to ignore. Critics were no longer seeing strength or reinvention in a flattering way. What they saw instead was repetition, polished moments, carefully managed messaging, and a story that seemed to keep rebuilding itself from the same source. Then Meghan Markle arrived at Paris Fashion Week, presenting herself in a way that drew immediate ridicule from some commentators, who mocked the image. She appeared to be chasing and dismissed the whole appearance as another attempt to place herself at the center of attention. With every new chapter, the sense grew that something was being taken from the same legacy again and again, not always from her image, but from the memory she kept drawing on. That was the irony people kept returning to. The same legacy that had helped build their global fame now seemed to be the very thing helping tear it down. When a story leans too heavily on borrowed pain, the echo does not fade, it gets louder. And at that moment, that echo sounded like Diana. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe it was not. But one thing felt increasingly hard to deny. Nothing around this couple looked accidental anymore. For years, the world had believed in a fairy tale, a prince breaking away from tradition and a woman offering a new path forward. Now what remained felt very different. It was noise, cameras, and two people trapped inside a story they no longer seemed able to control. Harry looked at the past and saw loss. Meghan looked at that same past and appeared to see opportunity. Somewhere between those two ways of seeing, something had quietly disappeared. What once looked like connection now felt like distance. That moment near the tunnel did not look like a simple mistake anymore. It looked like a reflection, a brief image of everything taking place underneath the surface. Tragedy had become optics. Grief had become visibility. Emotion had become content. The scene revealed two completely different directions. One was searching for peace, the other was staying in the spotlight. Even then, the media machine around them kept moving. There was the observation that Us Weekly, described as Harry and Meghan's personal press release service, was still pushing headlines within hours. One of them described Meghan Markle as quietly attending Balenciaga's Paris Fashion Week show. Quietly. That word itself was held up as absurd, because nothing about the appearance felt quiet at all. That is where the biggest questions settled between them. When every movement becomes a headline, how can anyone still tell what is real and what is performance? That may be why Harry finally snapped. Behind every lens, every exclusive, and every carefully timed public appearance, there was one thing he felt slipping away more and more: the memory of his mother, not protected, not preserved, pulled instead into the machinery of publicity. And perhaps that is where everything starts to change, because eventually it stops being about fame, control, or narrative. It becomes about truth, and truth is much harder to manage than any headline. Maybe the world does not need another photograph, another statement, or another perfectly managed response. Maybe what is missing is something much simpler and much more dangerous to lose: honesty. In a world built on attention, honesty stands out louder than anything else. That idea hangs over the whole situation, because what people believe they are watching is no longer a misunderstanding or a temporary media storm. It looks like a pattern of presentation, reaction, retreat, and rebranding, repeating over and over until the image itself starts collapsing under its own weight. The strain becomes even clearer when the focus returns to Harry and what Diana's memory means to him. Legacy was never about crowns or status in the way outsiders imagine. It was always bound up with something far heavier. Princess Diana is not historical symbolism to him. She is a wound that never properly healed. Her face is still everywhere, in headlines, documentaries, interviews, and endless retellings. Her story is replayed so often that it feels as if it never reached an ending. Now that same memory has become a battleground, with grief on one side and spectacle on the other. People close to him say that when Harry speaks about Diana, he does not speak in grand public language. He speaks about her as a woman who wanted peace and never got it. That is why these repeated references cut so deeply. Every time Meghan invokes Diana, whether through jewelry, comparisons, or carefully placed moments, it does not come across to everyone as tribute. To Harry, it feels like reopening something that never truly closed. It feels like being dragged back into the spotlight, his pain turned into content, shared, discussed, and amplified yet again. Those close to the royal circle say what may have begun as admiration slowly shifted into something else, something closer to imitation. It no longer looked like simply honoring the past. It looked like reshaping it. It no longer felt like remembrance. It felt like control over how that remembrance would be packaged and seen. That is what appears to be tearing Harry apart. No matter how much he tries to move forward, the world keeps pulling him back into the story of his mother. Every headline drags his name into history. Every controversy forces him into a narrative he never chose for himself. He is still seen as Diana's son before he is seen as a man trying to step beyond that shadow. Meghan, meanwhile, continues to present empowerment, confidence, and strength, continuing to build her narrative piece by piece. But critics do not see resilience in that anymore. They see calculation. They see carefully polished messages and repeated reinvention, each moment managed, each appearance sharpened, each controversy turned into another stage. That is why the legacy itself has become the most uncomfortable part of the whole picture. The same emotional history that made them globally compelling may also be the thing unraveling them. If fame is built too heavily on pain that does not belong equally to both people, then the imbalance eventually shows. The borrowed grief starts echoing louder than the message built around it. That is what people believe they are hearing now. Not a tribute, not a love story, but the sound of a memory being used too often and too publicly for something it was never meant to carry. For years, people wanted to believe in the romance of it, in the prince escaping tradition and the woman who would help him build something freer and more authentic. That is not the picture many believe they are looking at now. What they see instead is a couple surrounded by cameras, trapped in a cycle of scandal, attention, silence, and control. Harry sees pain in the past. Meghan sees visibility. Between those two impulses, the marriage itself begins to look less like a partnership and more like a divide. One person appears to be trying to protect memory. The other appears to be converting that memory into relevance. That is why the tunnel moment mattered so much. It condensed the whole story into a single image, tragedy becoming optics, grief becoming visibility, emotion becoming content, one person moving toward peace, the other remaining in the spotlight. And hanging over all of it is the silence between them, a silence heavier than any public statement. The world keeps asking the same thing now. When every move is staged, every appearance timed, and every controversy repurposed, where does truth still exist? Maybe that is why Harry's reaction felt so final to people watching. Not because of one video alone, but because that video seemed to reveal the whole machinery underneath. Every lens, every headline, every carefully managed public moment brought him back to the same unbearable feeling, that his mother's memory was not being shielded from the machine of publicity, but fed into it. And once that line is crossed, no explanation sounds simple anymore. What remains is the one thing missing from all the noise: honesty. If anyone wants to understand how deep this pattern of control and chaos really goes, that is the point where the story now stands.